The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining in. We still have about 5 minutes to go, so we'll start the webinar promptly at 11 ET. Please stay tuned for that. Hello again, everyone. We'll just give it another couple of minutes. We do still see people joining in, so we'll start promptly in a minute or so. Thanks. Hi everyone, thank you for your patience. I think we are ready to begin now. My name is Paresh. I'm going to be your moderator for the webinar. Before we start and I hand it over to Otto, I would like to remind you that all the participants would be on mute. So in case you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat functionality to type in your questions. We will be happy to answer those. Otto will be taking Q&A at the end of the session, so we will be glad to answer those questions. I would like to quickly introduce Otto. Otto has been in the digital marketing space since 2006. He's been delivering digital experiences since then via email marketing, website design, development and implementing of marketing automation platforms. In the past, he has ran his own web development and marketing automation agency, and he has built consulting practices in both Oracle and Adobe Marketing Clouds. He's specialized in B2B marketing scenarios and CRM integrations with marketing automation systems. So with that, over to you, Otto.
All right, thanks a lot, Paresh, and thanks everybody for joining today. As Paresh mentioned, my background is in multiple marketing automation platforms, along with quite a bit of website development and email marketing that I've done in the past. Really, when it comes down to lead scoring and B2B marketing, where you tend to find lead scoring most predominantly, I actually had been integrating various marketing automation platforms with various CRM platforms. And usually when you come up against that, you generally start at least talking about lead scoring, if not implementing full lead scoring models. So really, I've seen a number of the different philosophies around lead scoring. I've implemented a few of them, and I've implemented them out of various different platforms and for really various purposes. So today we're going to be talking about lead scoring best practices. It's really less best practices from a technical, mathematical point of view, although I will be going into some of those details. But more predominantly, it's really about why would you get lead scoring built in the first place, and what are some of the considerations that you need to put into thinking about it from a business process perspective in terms of making it successful. That's a step that I see, missed a lot when I go into engagements where I'm trying to help organizations implement a lead scoring model, and a lot of the times it'll be, well, my software does it, I want to use it, so let's just get something in there. Maybe you don't need a lead scoring model yet, if that's the case, or at the very least, you might not be thinking about, well, what am I actually going to be using this lead scoring model that I'm putting a lot of effort into building for at the end of the day. So that's what I'd like to focus on here. Again, as Paresh said, we'll be monitoring the questions in the chat, so please feel free to type in those questions. I'll certainly leave time at the end, but feel free to type in those questions in the interim, and Paresh can interrupt me and take a question, especially if you have a question in stream of what we're talking about. So without further ado, I'll just kind of go forward, really use my PowerPoints to guide the discussion. But let's just get into some of the basics first, so we're all on the same page in terms of what lead scoring is, and who uses it and what it's used for. So quite simply, it's a shared sales and marketing methodology, and I think that's the key. It's shared between both sales and marketing. You can't have one team doing this in a bubble without considering what the other team is thinking about in terms of what a lead scoring model does and is and how it will help them. And of course, the whole point is to rank leads in order to determine their actual sales readiness. Now, who uses it and why use it? Well, again, we've got two different teams that generally use it, and they generally look at it in different ways. So marketing uses lead scores for usually primarily it's personalization. So we want to understand where is this lead in the evaluation process that they're taking, and therefore, how do I actually surface up relevant content based on who this person is, how they've engaged, or how they haven't engaged, and how do I use that to influence the content and the messaging that I'm sending out to them. So obviously, at the end of the day, marketing is trying to figure out what's an actual MQL. And that's where we come into the other side of the page, sales. And sales is going to look at lead scoring for prioritization. They're interested in wasting less time, calling on those lower qualified leads, or maybe those leads that don't have the proper demographic fit. For instance, it's the wrong person to be talking to. They want to close deals faster, and the way they can do that is by kind of cutting through all of those leads that aren't really ready to be talking to a salesperson, and focusing on the higher quality leads. So we really do have to understand, how does this fit into how sales is looking at the process of communicating with leads, as opposed to how marketing is looking at surfacing content up with a lead, which is a very different type of communication. And this is why we really have to get both teams in the room together. And I've run a lot of these engagements. It's surprising sometimes how you get these two different kind of viewpoints in the room, and they've never really talked about it together, and they realize like, wow, you know, I'm thinking about this completely different than how you're thinking about it, and really all we have to do is kind of get on the same page, and we'll really be able to inform ourselves on how we should do things like construct a lead scoring model, and where an MQL threshold actually is and isn't, because it's not always the same between both teams, and sometimes it's just, you know, let's get in a room together and talk about it, and we'll actually get some headway on what we need to do next. So there's a lot of stats on this. I like to at least back up what I'm saying with some numbers here, but there is proven effectiveness behind using the lead scoring model. Marketing Sherpa had a study that had it boosting by 77% the ROI that comes out of lead generation. So it's not just we're sending more leads, but the actual ROI itself is generally boosted by about 77% when you do have a good lead scoring model in place. Gartner had a study that you know, really kind of showed the converse. 70% of leads end up being lost because of poor follow-up, and lead scoring actually improves the quality of that follow-up, and thus you're able to win more leads because you do understand, you know, who has a very high level of engagement. You understand what audience member you're talking about, especially if you're using an account-based model. It's very, very important to understand, well, you know, the influencer has been doing all of this stuff and it's been interacting to a high degree, but the decision maker is still at a low level, and maybe we need to call him and talk about, you know, getting him and his influencer in a room together, and really setting up that type of you know, follow-up that's very meaningful to the client. You can actually derive that from lead scores as well, and make sure that you're not only having the right conversation with you know, the right person from the account, but also that you're bringing somebody else from the account who maybe needs to see that, hey, you know, your colleague is very interested in this, and maybe he's feeling this sort of pain, so let's talk about it and see what we can do to help you guys out. So again, it's very proven for both a revenue as well as you know, a qualitative. Are we actually getting better, higher quality communications out to our contacts through using lead scoring? Now, another numbers one. This is a case study, you know, done by Eloqua on you know, 10 of their customers that were actually using the lead scoring module out of the platform. So they've got some very specific numbers here, and you know, I think the interesting thing out of all of these numbers is you'll see that before lead scoring, they were sending about 1,372 leads. After lead scoring, it actually went down by about 325 leads, down to 1,058. So you know, you've got a decrease in the actual MQLs that are being sent to sales, but all of the other numbers, the closed deals, the revenue that's coming in per client, and the revenue per deal, all went up by double digits. So it's pretty clear just by seeing that, you know, you've got a 10% increase in your closed deals just by using lead scoring and using it properly. That can have a huge impact, especially if your numbers are large. So just a couple of stats to back up some of the thinking that we have, and some of the results that you've really can see if you do have you know, lead scoring implemented within your process. And again, that it's really cohesively done within your sales and marketing stages, if you will, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. A couple of things that I like to go over. One thing is don't confuse lead stages with lead scoring. You see a lot of that where you've got people correlating a bunch of lead stages like hot, cold, warm, or you know, you'll see I've got a diagram with a bunch of other lead stages from a best practices standpoint. You're not necessarily taking a lead score and aligning it to a lead stage. They're not the same thing. Lead stages are used for a different purpose to really understand where within the buyer's journey someone sits, but it doesn't necessarily mean that their lead score correlates to exactly where in that process they are, because they could be a very, very well qualified lead, but they're just simply not within that stage of the process that says, okay, we know this guy is certainly the highest quality lead that we can score, but they're still too early in the process for us to really be bombarding them with sales calls and things like that. So you have to keep these separate so that you can understand both of them, and really it becomes, once a lead gets to a certain point within that buyer's journey, where generally we've got an MQL threshold, well, okay, they're an MQL, but what type of MQL are they? How does the sales team then prioritize? So to illustrate that, I do have the very best practices leads stage funnel here. Yours may look completely different. Again, this is just best practices, and the point here isn't the stages themselves, but the process. So let's just say, without lead scoring, you've got marketing generating 100 leads that come up through the MQL stage, and now they're sitting at a sales accepted stage, waiting for sales to either accept or reject these leads. So of course, without having a lead scoring process in place, you've just got 100 leads coming in, and now the sales team has to kind of sort through them and figure out, well, which ones, not only are actual MQLs, but which ones are the higher priority ones that I should have my sales team, spend their time calling and going after very specifically. So once you implement lead scoring, and quite simply, we then break things down into using a co-dynamic lead scoring model. Maybe we've got 25 of these 100 are A1 leads, 30 are B1 leads, 15 are A4s, and 30 are C1. So this is a particular lead scoring model, and we'll go into some of the details of what these A1, B1, A4, C1 mean. But very briefly, an A1 would be the best lead. The A is a demographic fit, the 1 is an engagement fit. A is the absolute best person to talk to. 1 means that they've shown lots and lots of engagement. So you got 25 of those, that they're going to go directly into sales. They're going to be well qualified in sales. You talk to them. The B1s, also very high, very probably the right person to talk to. Maybe not as good as an A, but still very good. And again, they've got a 1 in their engagement. So again, that's going right to sales, and we're going to actually route those to a sales rep so they can follow up. The A4s, okay, we know it's the right person, but a 4 is a little bit less of an engagement. And the C1s, we've got obviously a lot of engagement. People might be, clicking all over our website, looking at very high value content that really shows that they're interested in a purchase decision. But a C, they're not the right person. So maybe we know that, maybe we just don't know enough information about them. But what we can do is we can say, look, the C1s, we're just going to disqualify those. Maybe marketing then has a recycling process for those disqualified leads, but we're going to drop those out. The A4s we're going to recycle right back because we know it's the right person, of course, but we just haven't seen the full engagement that says that they're ready for an actual sales conversation. So that's going to recycle back into an earlier stage of the funnel, and then once maybe that 4 goes up to say a 3 or a 2, we'll send them back over to sales and say, hey, these guys are now ready to be spoken to. So this now cuts down this 100 leads that sales originally was going to have to sort through to 55 leads that are pretty well qualified, and using the A and the B designation, you could then prioritize those even further on the sales side. When they're looking through the leads, they can see the score and say, hey, look, let's start with the 25 A's. Once we've gone through those, then we'll get into the 30 B leads. But again, they'll be able to prioritize the hottest leads. So this is really where, of course, the lead scoring comes in and helps us from both a marketing as well as a sales process perspective. So regardless of what your lead stage looks like, if you don't even have lead stages, you can still use this scoring model to prioritize who should actually be followed up with and when, and who might need to have a bit more nurturing done before they're ready to actually speak with sales. So moving on, it's how do you actually build this? How do you get to the point where you can actually figure out what an A1 or a B1 or perhaps it's a different lead scoring model you're going to use? How do you actually go about putting in place the things that you need to consider and the decisions that you need to make in order to build out this scoring model? What do you do? So first of all, let's go through types of lead scoring. The first type, and it used to be the most popular, it's waning in popularity. It's quite simple. It's just a single number score where you've got a bunch of criteria, and each criteria has a numerical score that either adds or subtracts a point value, and that numerical score is usually based on either a 100 or 1,000 point scale. depending on how you're going to set up your mathematics. Now, just as an example, we'll use a 1,000-point scale. We've got a title. Someone fills out a form. They say, hey, my title is vice president. That's 200 points. The company revenue, again, they filled out a form, or maybe we've gotten it from some sort of information service. It's $1 billion plus. That's 200 points we'll add to the score. Now we've also seen that this person's downloaded a white paper yesterday from our site. That's 300 points we'll add to the score. So that's a 700-point lead score out of 1,000. That's a pretty hot lead. Great. Very easy to implement, very simple to understand. It's just how many points out of 1,000, and maybe you'll layer in a cold, warm, hot type of designation based on how many points. The problem that you sometimes run into with a single number score is sometimes you won't have any information except for the fact that the person has downloaded a white paper. Maybe they've downloaded 6 of them in the last 24 hours. So that would jack their score up pretty high, and artificially so, in terms of being an actual lead. So that's the problem you generally get into with single number scores, and why they're really being phased out. As I note here, the use of these scores is really on the outs, and people are going to a co-dynamic scoring model where you're separating out the engagement score. So, did they download a white paper, or did they attend one of my webinars or something like that? And you're separating that from, well, who are they? Are they the right person? Are they the actual decision maker and the person who's going to sign the check? When I make the sale with them at the end of the day. So single numbers are a great way to start out, but it usually will result in a lot of false leads, just due to the fact that your score may get artificially inflated, and you do have to put some controls into that in order to make sure that either those things aren't happening, or that you really take a look first and say, hey, did this score go up because it's all engagement, and we don't know if their title exists. That field's blank. You might have to put some controls in terms of how much you're going to actually give to each criteria. So it becomes conditional in a way that really takes some maintenance to do a single number score. So it's again, good way to start, just to get something down there, but usually you have to get into some considerations about, well, what does the score actually mean? Now, the second type is the co-dynamic score, and this is the model that you're seeing a lot of even software platforms move to. If they haven't already, they've probably put some version of co-dynamic in, and that's where you're splitting up the engagement and the profile score so that you can get what you saw before, something like an alphanumeric code, like A1, B1, B2. You'll see different terminology. Some people will just have, behavioral score as opposed to profile score, and it'll just be a number 1 out of 100, and they'll just have 2 fields for it. But as I mentioned, most of the big software platforms in terms of marketing automation are including some sort of co-dynamic lead scoring now within their tools. So how does co-dynamic really work? Well, as I said before, you're splitting the explicit, profile fit from the implicit or engagement fit, and you're coming up with a score like A1, B1, B2. So really, if you go through what's an A4, for instance, that's the right person, but they have no interest. They probably need more nurturing before they become an MQL. So you can kind of put in the description and what the actual action would be based on what the lead score is. And as I said, for something like a D4, where the wrong fit, no interest, I'm sorry, a bad example, C1 more particularly, where they've got a lot of engagement, but they're the wrong person, it's something that you can actually take into account, as opposed to someone who's just, again, downloaded 7 white papers, so they've got a very high single number score, and therefore we're going to send them over to sales. Sales is going to call them, figure out it's just, some associate who's maybe doing some research, and it's not really the right person to talk to. So again, we want to save the sales team from wasting time on calls like that, where they really find out it's this isn't the right guy at all, and I could have spent my time calling someone else. So that's where co-dynamic really is a good tool to truly understand a bit more about, well, is this actually a qualified lead? Is it actually a prioritized lead? Someone that we should put, all the way up to having a hot lead status, so that sales is really getting it, at the top of the list. This becomes the better way to take, into true business consideration, who is this person and how engaged truly are they.
Hey Otto, we have a question from Isabel on that. It says, would you say that the number, which is the engagement score, is more important than the letter, which is the demographic score?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think it's more important per se, but it is one that you do need to put a little bit more consideration into, because obviously, the profile fit is very straightforward. Do we know that this person is a vice president? Do we know something or other about the count, like the annual revenue, or maybe we're an insurance company and we want to know how many employees they have, to insure something like that. That's very direct information that we can really get fixed data for, and usually we can get it fairly easily. The engagement score does require a bit more thought in terms of, well, what's truly a piece of content that someone's looking at or downloading, or a web page they're visiting that's really valuable for me to include in a lead score. It's not necessarily that they've been on my website, but what were they looking at specifically? So you have to line your content up with trying to drive, on the website side, we would call it a conversion. Either someone hitting a buy button or at least giving us some identifiable information. And how does that actually affect the lead score? Did they submit a form that says, general contact us, they're looking for some information, or did they submit a form that says, I want to talk to a sales rep right now? The first one's probably not even considered in the lead score, whereas the latter would probably have a very high lead score. So that engagement, in my opinion, does take more of the thought process when you're actually getting into planning out, well, what should go into my lead score. That's the one that generally takes a lot more time to get in place, and it certainly takes more time to implement, especially if you've got all sorts of content that you need to tag and really score as part of your lead scoring model. And we're going to talk about that actually in some slides coming up, where we go through some of the criteria that a lot of people put in, and is it the right criteria to include in the lead score or not? But yeah, good question, and certainly, as I said before, not that profile fit isn't important, it is, but it's usually the easier one to figure out. And I think we've kind of gone over this, what is the demographic fit? As I was saying, it's the identifiable known information, title, company location, annual revenue, things that we can get a very fixed and true or false answer for. It's going to be data that we very, very explicitly do know. Engagements, implicit, and just the nature of it being implicit means that it's harder to figure out. You have to put more consideration into figuring out what this derived value is. So that's where it becomes a little bit trickier to really put in place. Now, how do we get there in terms of getting the numbers down and actually figuring the numerical portion, and also how do we consider, well, what criteria is going to be important for me to actually look at? I generally use a spreadsheet like this one here, and a lot of different organizations and companies use something similar, so you may have seen something like this, but just to figure out the numerical stuff and really kind of get that out of our head so we don't have to think about it so much. What this is doing is it's taking each one of these categories that are down on the left-hand side, that the pain, need, solution, job role, industry, lead source. These are just examples, but these are criteria for the demographic explicit fit. So we can easily then go to the next column with field values and say, for instance, job role, I've just got dummy info in this particular slide. So job role 1 might be CEO, job role 2, might be vice president. As we go to the next column over, the tier, we'll say, well, is this tier 1, meaning it's the most important, most valuable piece of this role, or is it tier 2, it's a little less valuable? Each one of those tiers will then line up with the score, the percentage of the score that is available for that particular category. So all of this kind of getting in here gets you to a point where you can just, at the end of the day, come over to the right-hand column where the total possible points for the category is what you would end up tweaking. So there's a process, obviously, to getting to this. You have to go through and really decide, for instance, which job roles am I going to score on, and which ones should have a little bit lower of a score or a little bit higher of a score. Obviously, if it shouldn't be scored, you wouldn't even have it on the spreadsheet at all. Anything that has a 0, you don't even need to include in the spreadsheet. And as you go through figuring out with your team, and this has to be an exercise that both sales and marketing goes through together and decides what this criteria is we're going to include here, your scoring formula will end up being set in terms of the criteria that you're looking at. So we're looking at demographic right now. Again, this is the easier one because generally, teams both in sales and marketing have a pretty good idea of who it is that they're trying to target. So this part of it usually goes pretty quick. Yeah, we're targeting CEOs, vice presidents, and senior directors of marketing in the financial industry. That's going to be pretty easy to work out and figure out which ones are going to be the influencers as opposed to the decision makers, and how that lead score should be derived. So once you have those field values and those categories in the first left-hand columns worked out, and we've got 4 categories here. You generally don't want to go beyond 4 categories, 4, maybe 5, but you don't want to complicate the score so much. The field values themselves, once they're set, you might add or subtract them, in the future, but in general, it's going to be in the same category. That's the general idea in terms of, at the end of the day, simplifying this, because going through this spreadsheet process, it actually, believe it or not, simplifies your ability to tweak the scores and slide the values back and forth based on the various lead scores you see coming out on the other side, and whether or not they're actually closing revenue. So getting the spreadsheet filled out with all of your tiered values, with all of the specific scores you want to give to a vice president as opposed to a CEO, just using job role as the example there, that total possible points category is what you can then adjust. So if you decide that job role is actually, that's a criteria that should be more heavily weighted than anything else here, you can say, a job role should actually be worth 40 points. And then you'll divvy up the other 60 points of that 100-point total across the other 3 categories. So that's what, after you get your score implemented and you start looking at how your results have come out and you want to make some adjustments, it becomes a lot easier to slide the total possible points for the category value. So that rightmost column is really the only thing that you end up having to tweak usually at the end of the day. So you can slide those values back and forth to adjust which lead scores apply to which leads, and that's what gives you a manageable lead score. And I know there's a lot of components here, so you're thinking, wow, that seems like a lot to manage. At the onset, the first implementation of it, yeah, you're gonna have to make some decisions, but once that's done, maintaining your scoring model in a separate spreadsheet, regardless of which software that you're using, and making adjustments to it here before you ever implement it in your software, is really going to be the key to making sure that you're on the same page, to making sure that you're not overcomplicating the score with too many categories or too many criteria, and also to make it easier to adjust the score moving forward. So this is how we really want to start out, is what criteria, what categories over here on the left are important, and we'll fill in the middle bits once we understand which categories they are. But before we do that, let's go over to the right-hand category and really figure out, well, maybe the job role should be weighted heavier than the industry or vice versa. And let's put some values there. That'll be the basis. And then you can fill in the middle and adjust the middle as you see fit as well. So this is kind of just, from the technical, mathematical perspective, without actually getting into the math, this is the way that you really need to kind of consider what your lead scoring model is going to look like. And if you're using a single number score, by the way, you only need one spreadsheet, because there's really only one set of numbers you're working with. If you're using codynamic, you then have to, after you're done with the profile fit, you have to switch over to the engagement fit, which is very similar. Really, the only difference between the engagement and the profile, as you'll see, is that you've got a time frame category here in column 3. So of course, if someone had attended an event or visited a web page or whatever it might have been, if they're doing it more recently, that's going to score higher than if they did it 6 months ago. So that's really the only other consideration that you're looking at when you're considering an engagement score over a profile fit score. Or again, if you're using single number, it's all going to look like the profile fit. Engagement fit, though, you really have to bring that recency of the actual action having occurred into your score. If you're not doing this, and this is missed all the time, especially on single number scores, you're going to have artificially high lead scores because someone downloaded some white papers, 6 months, a year ago. it's not going to be relevant anymore. So you do have to make that consideration. And as I mentioned before, in response to the question that came up, this is where you have to look at these categories and some of the examples we have here, events or a webinar attendee. Well, you could break that down even further into which event. You might have different events supporting different products. You might need to score differently based on which piece of content is actually coming up, and does it apply to, for instance, brand A or brand B, if you've got a company that has multiple brands. So engagement score, beyond needing to put that time frame in there, you do have to really consider what is the engagement, the specific engagement, and that kind of comes back to what's your specific content. So as I go through some of these categories that we have, again, a webinar. Well, did I attend the webinar, for, let's just assume I'm a financial services firm. Did I attend the webinar for the affiliates, which would be the financial advisors that I'm trying to partner with to get to the end client, or do I have a completely separate business where I'm selling to retail clients? Well, which webinar are we talking about? Which service do I need to score on? Do they have a high score for service A and a lower score for service B? Do I need to then route that to my sales team differently? So this is, again, where we really need to put a lot more thought into the engagement score and break it down in terms of what is the actual valuable content and what's not. A high value form, I used the example earlier of, is it just a general contact form, or is it, I was looking at a white paper, there was a, contact sales right now form on that page. That's going to be in the scoring model. The general contact form, probably not going to be in the scoring model at all. We probably wouldn't even score on it. So you do have to, again, really, really consider which content that you have, why you have that content there. What that usually means for a lot of organizations and a lot of clients that I work with is, have you aligned your content that you've got on your website, that you've got in your mobile app, that you've got in your white papers, do you have that aligned to a specific outcome already? If you don't, go back and do that, and that will really determine not only should it be scored, but which product are we scoring on? That's an important step as well, and that's where we really get to the question, and we've already been talking about it, do you need multiple lead scores? Because a lot of the times, especially in terms of getting it built out in a software platform, we'll just say, hey, it's easy, and you set these parameters, you hit the save button, and you're all done. But they don't really get into, well, am I going to need more than one of these things? Is it going to need to change based on the fact that maybe I've already sold someone one product, and now I've got to score them for my other products? So there's some questions you have to ask yourself when you get into lead scoring. After you've figured out which type of lead score you want to implement, that kind of leads you to what criteria you would have in those lead scores. If you're asking, do you have more than one brand, obviously you would want to have a separate score per brand. Well, one lead score for brand A is not necessarily, and usually does not mean that it's a good lead for brand B. So you have to take those into consideration. You have to understand whether your products are significantly different. So really what that means is, when you've got your sales team getting leads in, do you have specific sales members that sell a very specific type of your product, or sells to the next one here, a very specific segment? Would you have a client who might be, let's say, in the healthcare sector, and you would sell the same product to that client, regardless of whether they were in healthcare or financial services or insert industry here? If that's the case, you probably just need one general lead score. But if you've got a separate process for selling to different industries, and especially if you've got a separate sales team that's selling to those industries, you're going to have multiple lead scores to inform those sales teams exactly what the lead score is in their particular area. So this is, again, something that gets missed a lot. And if I back up a little bit here, if you've got if you need a multiple set of scoring criteria to support different industries or different products or different brands or whatever it might be, you're going to have to consider these spreadsheets a little bit differently, because the event or webinar in category 1 here that you're going to use for, again, let's just say healthcare, might be a completely different event or webinar than you would use for financial services, and so on and so forth. Different forums, different web pages, different content on those web pages. So you're going to have to break it down and make sure that your content is aligned to the specific product or interest that it should be supporting. And that's going to, again, make you think a little bit about, well, how do I actually construct my engagement score? If you don't need to go to that level of specificity, if you don't, if you only have one product, if you have multiple products but they're all very similar, and your sales team is selling all of them, and they just kind of need to know, well, is this the right type of person that we usually sell to or not? Then you'd be looking at this criteria a lot differently. It would be a lot more general criteria, and you probably would only need one scoring model. So again, that's a step that I really see a lot of organizations miss, and they think they only need one, or they're looking at very general scoring criteria that's just going to say, well, yeah, this person was engaged, but were they engaged with the right type of content? So you do need to think about the specific content that should be included within an engagement score like this one, and is it actually valuable, or is it just saying, yeah, someone was looking around on our website, maybe kicking tires, but they didn't actually show true interest. So let me get back to where I was here. So again, these questions, some good ones to ask as you're, before you even get into the other technical components. You should be asking these questions and making sure that you understand, if it's multiple, how many are they going to be, and really putting some separation between, building those lead scores. You might start with one, start slow, see how it works, learn a little bit about how your organization looks at lead scoring, and then implement the rest of them. But at the very least, you do need to at least have an understanding of, well, long term, at the end of the day, how many lead scores am I going to have to build? And if it's a large number, maybe you look at it differently. Maybe you try and get to more of a general lead score. And there's some things you can do to score more generally as opposed to more specific based on product that may help you out. Now, finally, at the end of the day, once you do get all of these, scoring parameters done, as I said before, you have a scale of 100 points, and is represented by percentages here, and that then correlates to the A, B, C, D for the profile fit, or the 1, 2, 3, 4 for the engagement fit. So this is really just what you would probably start out with. You break it into quarters. Anyone above a 75 on the profile side would be an A, 50 to 75 a B, and so on and so forth. Engagement, same thing. Above a 75, you're a 1, 50 to 75 a 2, so on and so forth. Very easy, obviously, for the human brain to look at and just say, yeah, that's let's start with that. Quarters, it's nice, clean numbers, great. But as I mentioned, this is where you're going to end up scaling if you really figure out that something that's a 75, like you're right on the cusp between an A and a B. Maybe a 75 isn't actually an A. Maybe it's more like an 80 or an 85. So you can scale up what that actual score is that correlates to an A, a B, a C, or a D. So this also, once you've got the work done, the hard work of implementing the score done, you've got another place where you can scale what the actual scoring thresholds are. And that's going to be important because you can't just build your lead scoring model and then just say, hey, yay, we're done. We put it in place. We did some math. We voted on some criteria. We got it in. Everything's great. Now we've got a lead scoring model and it's working. It'd be great if it worked that way all the time. Unfortunately, that's usually the exception to the rule, and you need to put a lead scoring model in place, let it run for a little while, and then you really need to do some iterative feedback and come back and bring the team back together and see how things have gone. So what you really do is, over time, when you first implement the score, every single score is going to still go to sales. You're not going to suppress anything from going to sales. Like we saw in my lead stage diagram, where we're taking the A4s and the C1s and we're putting them back into earlier stages, and we're just simply disqualifying them. We're not going to do that. Once we press that go button, that play button on our lead scoring formula, we still have to send everything over to sales. We can't suppress anything yet. We need to make sure that when it gets over to the sales team, an A1 or an A2 is actually an A1 or an A2. We need to collect that feedback. So generally, after the first quarter, I like to use that schedule. We'll come back and we'll look at some reports. That's usually when you're looking at all the reports for sales outcomes and all of your results for the quarter anyway. So it's usually a good time to do it. But in any case, you do need to set a time period. If it's a month, if it's a quarter, if it's a year, you do need to come back and take a look at the results. And by results, I really mean attribution reporting on what's actually closed based on all these leads. Were they an A1 lead when they closed? Were they a B2 lead? Were they a D4 lead when they closed? And therefore, something might be a little off on our scoring model. We need to make some adjustments, like scaling that score up or down, or going in and looking at some of the criteria. And maybe we figure out that if someone's a CEO, that's actually not so important. We'll lighten the weight on that particular piece of the scoring model. So we are going to come back and iterate after that first time. Once we iterate, now we're going to pare it down to, for example, and it's going to vary based on what we figure out in each analysis. But for example, now we're only going to bring, A1 through C2 are going to go to sales, and we know everything else we're pretty confident is disqualified and it's not going to turn into a sale. So now we'll start suppressing some scores. We then really want to rinse and repeat this one more time. So now we're about at that 6-month mark, after the second quarter has passed that we've had our lead score running. We'll rinse and repeat the same analysis. We'll take a look at the attribution reports again, and we'll try and pare it down to, okay, now we've only got A1 through A3, B1, B2, and C1, and nothing else is going over because we know everything else is not yet qualified enough, and it's not going to close. So that's what we're trying to get to. Along the way, we again are going to be making some of those small tweaks to the score by scaling our thresholds back and forth as the data tells us we should. But this is also another step that really gets left behind, and it's why a lot of organizations, I think, don't have success with lead scoring, or they'll put it in and they'll be like, well, maybe we had an impact. They can't really figure out if they had an impact or not. But this is really the step that's being missed, and it's not the fun step because, okay, now I got to get a bunch of data, I got to sift through some reports, I got to do some analysis and truly figure out, which scores made sense and which scores didn't, and this will, over time become more and more and more efficient. So this is really a one-day process, though. I think that's another thing that kind of scares people, saying, oh my God, 3 months out, 6 months out. Yeah, but it's 3 months out, and then let's get together, look at the data for a day. That's really all it takes. Make some quick adjustments. Again, we've already got the scoring model built. It's a matter of just adjusting our scores up and down, adjusting our thresholds up and down, and then we can move forward with the next iteration. So it's not very labor-intensive doing this, but it is a step that a lot of people miss. They forget to schedule it. It's hard to think 3 months down the road, can I get even half a day for my team to get together and look at this stuff? But it is really, really important to do it, because you either don't know if what you've just done is working or not, or you just can't optimize it. So you can't really show, from my stat before, about a 77% uptick in ROI. So that's really something that has to take place if you do want to see those sorts of outcomes, and you really want a scoring model that's going to give value to both your bottom line as well as your process in terms of efficiency. So this step needs to be done, and I can't stress it enough. I keep talking about it, but it's because it really is very important.
Hey Otto, we have 2 questions before you move ahead. So
Sure.
the first one is from Jessica. How do you train or provide coaching on the scoring rubric to your sales team or selling channel? Is there a simplified explanation to help a seller prioritize lead quality?
Yeah, that's also a very, very good question. That's another step, and this is regardless of whether we're talking about lead scoring or integrating a CRM or integrating any 2 processes together. You really have to have a good communication strategy internally to broadcast this out. And the other thing is enforcement. A lot of the times it's things like putting a reason for disqualification, into a CRM system are skipped. And it's something that, you can make it simple. You can make it a drop down of things and just put that in, and you don't end up getting the proper feedback. So you do have to make sure that this is broadcast across the entire team. Really, what helps there a lot is just having as many people involved in the process as possible, at least to come in and witness what's going on. Because it's hard if you're sitting out in your own office doing your own thing, and a central organization does something and kind of says like, oh hey, yeah, we did this, we got a lead score now. It'll be in the CRM system to, keep a lookout for it. That's not going to really help the sales team prioritize. You do have to a little bit more systematically put in place what the actual lead scores should trigger in terms of what the next action should be. So this is where we're getting into a little bit more overall, CRM integration and sales and marketing integration strategy here, because it's bigger than lead scoring. Lead scoring can help you make sure that the right criteria, the right communication is happening between sales and marketing, but you have to know the overall conversation that's taking place. And so you do have to, go about putting in a complete lead management process and where all teams understand exactly what the different components are of that process, why they're happening, and at the end of the day, it's not just, hey, I've got a lead score, and if it's high, that means you get a hot lead column, but it's, look, we've looked through what our buyers do in terms of starting out as an unknown person who's just, come to our site organically for the first time, all the way through to being a converted identifiable person, what we can then push out to them to really continue to garner their interest and push them through further sales phases. And once we've done all that from a marketing perspective, the reason that this is an A1 as opposed to a B1, or let's say an A2 as opposed to an A1, is because we know that their interactions with the content that we've produced will yield a particular outcome, and because that it's yielded that particular outcome, salesperson, it's a A2, this is the follow-up you need to have with an A2. This is the follow-up that you would have with a B1 that's different from an A2. So you do have to put some thought into the entire process to make sure that this is going to be something valuable. And I would say, a lot of people say, hey, look, lead scoring is going to be great, we want to implement it, let's do it. One of my first questions is, well, what's your overall lead management process like? And if that's not in place yet, it's probably not time for lead scoring yet. You've got to get that down first, and you have to make sure that that process makes sense before lead scoring is going to inform, the sales team in any more meaningful way than what you've got. So you really can't do it, completely standalone. It does have to fit into a larger overall lead management process.
Okay, and then the second question is from Mike. Couldn't we get the profile fit by querying our database and looking for specific demographics in the DB, and then pair it with the activity lead score? I think they use Silverpop, and Silverpop has a single scoring model.
Yes, you could, and people do that, especially when they do have a software platform that doesn't, have a module that separates them out. That is absolutely a strategy that works, and there's no reason that you couldn't use that as a stand-in for a profile fit, I should say a co-dynamic lead scoring model. The important thing at the end of the day is once you've derived, and however it is that you're going to derive that profile fit or that engagement fit, it's just a matter of making sure that's stored in the field somewhere. So it's, I've derived it in this way. It doesn't matter if the software has a true module for it or not, but I've been able to use a segmentation builder or something along those lines to figure out who should be, of a particular score. Let's at least make sure it's tagged there, and then again, pushed over from there to say the CRM system or whatever it is that's being used for administering the actual sales process. So yeah, absolutely. If you can't get a platform or you don't have a platform that has a specific lead scoring module that works in this way, there's a lot of other ways to derive scores using the tools within a lead scoring platform, or I should say a marketing platform, so that you can come up with that score on your own without actually having a module in the software.
Great. We actually have two more questions. Otto, would you want to take it at the end, or do you want to do that right now?
No, let's take them now.
Okay, sure. So the next one is from Isabel. Could you talk a bit more about how marketing would use lead scoring for content personalization? So far, I think we have talked more about impact on sales for prioritization.
Yeah, we have. You're right, and the impact that lead scoring ends up having on the actual marketing content and process is usually a bit more the other way around. So the content itself ends up informing the lead score. Now, you could kind of reverse into it and you could say, we've got an overall customer journey where we're trying to drive to a specific outcome. And because we know what the outcome is, we can back into, well, we need content that drives the person to that outcome, and it needs to be, specific to this audience member in this way and to a different type of audience member in a different way. Really, what it comes down to is that outcome that all that content is driving towards. That should be the actual score, or at least the category within your scoring model that you need to enter in. So especially when you're talking about different types of products or different types of services that might be sold differently one from another and therefore marketed differently, you do have to align your content to those outcomes. So if the outcome would then be, pushing the lead score up above a threshold, which would say to a sales member, this is priority, that's how you need to go back and structure your content. Now, the other way around is if you've got a particular lead score that comes in, and you know that lead score because they've already taken, say, steps 1 and 2 of that lead stage through that content, you can say, all right, great. I know that their engagement score is a 3 now. It's moved from a 4, which is nothing, to a 3 because they've taken the first 2 steps within this content journey. I know that because of that, I need to surface up content that's specifically positioned to move them from a 3 engagement to a 2 or a 1. And so you're going to have content rules if you are going to bring this back to the way marketing needs to structure its content based on lead score. This is all going to come back to your personalization strategy and the fact that you've got somebody who's already seen certain pieces of content, and because of that, their lead score has gone up on their engagement side. Well, therefore, the next time they come to my website or my mobile app or whatever it might be, I can see, well, you know what, they're already a 3, which means they've already gone through, say, the very preliminary, evaluation stages of their lead journey. I know I need to start surfacing up engagement level 2 and 1 content. You could tag it that way and say, this is engagement level 3 content. But once they've already seen that and their engagement level has gotten to 3, now I need to start surfacing up engagement level 2 content. And once they've engaged with that, that'll bump them up to a 2. Now I can start surfacing engagement level 1 content. So you can look at it that way. It's something that's very, very valuable if you've got a lot of different content, and if you are an organization that does have, many products or at the very least multiple products or multiple brands. It's very, very valuable to do that and to put some strategy or I'm sorry, some tagging data behind each individual piece of content that then correlates to a lead score. If you've got just one product or you're a smaller business that doesn't have so many different types of things that they're trying to drive an outcome for, I wouldn't really go that far because it's a little bit too much and it becomes overcomplicated from a content production standpoint. The larger organizations that do have multiple products, I mean, unfortunately for them, it's complicated for them anyway, and they do have to put those considerations into their content strategy. So it's kind of like while you're at it, you should definitely try and figure out, well, what lead score level, really should influence the content that's being surfaced as well. But honestly, if you don't need to do it and you can get away with not, having to tag specific lead scoring data to content and you don't have a lot of content, you can look at it a little bit more simply, and I would look at it the other way around, and that is, I've got this content which I know supports the product because that's the only product I'm supporting. If they see it, if it's just general, hey, you were on my homepage, I know that that's probably less of a highly scored engagement than if they drill down into a deeper specific page like a white paper, like a more info page that's going to give them a lot of details on maybe pricing of the product or something like that. That should influence the score. Using the score to influence the content, though, as I said before, it does complicate your content production, and I wouldn't try and do that so much unless you, again, already have a multi-product strategy and you've got a content strategy that's complicated enough to require it.
Great.
I hope that helps.
So the next question is from Jonathan. Um, do you know if this methodology has been compared to statistical lead scoring methodologies such as logistic modeling, lookalike modeling, etc.? If so, how does it compare? What are the similarities and differences? Can these methods be used in conjunction?
Yeah, they would be used in conjunction for sure, because this type of lead scoring is not meant to replace something like predictive modeling or lookalike modeling. That is certainly more on the content strategy side of things as opposed to the lead management side of things. Where again, if you don't really know much about a person and they're all over your site, you can certainly take that behavior, compare it to somebody else who maybe closed uh, on an actual conversion, a closed deal came out of their behavior, and say, well, this guy has shown behavior that looks a lot like the guy who closed, so therefore let's make sure that the next piece of content we show him is the same as the next piece of content that the person who actually closed saw. So that is not lead scoring as we're looking at it right now. And certainly that particular type of content scoring, as I usually refer to it as, would go hand in hand with lead scoring. So content scoring is certainly going to, and lookalike modeling and all of that is certainly going to influence perhaps the email they get sent, or again, the banner that shows up on the web page they're on, or what push message they get through your mobile app, or any sorts of those types of inbound or outbound content display. Regardless of which piece of content that is, depending on how highly valuable that content is, it may or may not end up going into their engagement score on the lead side of things. So the lead scoring is really more about, again, prioritizing it to the sales team. It's not so much about are we going to influence the next piece of content they see, or which piece of content gets dynamically displayed on a web page. You could use it that way, as I said before. Maybe if you've got a lot of content and someone's already been on your site in a bunch of areas and they've got a high lead score for a particular product, well, next time they go to a general page on your site, make sure it's that product that's being targeted. Make sure it's they're still on that lead path for that particular lead score. I will say there's a lot more than just the lead score that goes into that type of dynamic content personalization. But again, if I bring this back to this type of lead scoring, which at the end of the day, when you have an A1, B1, D2, whatever it is, it's going to be more informative to the sales team once it becomes an MQL than it's going to be to the marketing team. The marketing team is certainly going to be able to use that to personalize. And you can absolutely set it up so that it's directly derived from the lead score. I've seen that done in the past. And if you can keep it simple enough, then certainly that's viable. Again, the larger organizations that have more than one thing going on, it's a lot harder to do it with just a lead score. And you generally need to couple lead score with content score with the actual profile that you're going to use for your lookalike modeling and things like that. So I think short answer, yes, you do it in conjunction, and you would really use two, or I should say both of those pieces for different things at the end of the day.
Thanks, Otto. Those were all the questions. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm seeing that we're right up on time. So I just wanted to put kind of a lead scoring implementation timeline up on the screen here, just so you can see that honestly getting the scoring built, especially if you're just doing a single score, it shouldn't take too long. I've got it as a 4-week time frame. That's our general rule of thumb when we're going out and doing this for clients, but we can usually do it within 4 weeks. What's going to stretch this out is going to be things that are unrelated to lead scoring, but will directly impact it. Things like, do I have all of my data integrations set up so that I actually have the information I need to put into the score? So you can still go about deriving the lead scoring formula. You could even start to implement it, perhaps in a manual fashion, but you might run into, well, you know what, I actually don't have all of my web analytics data integrated with my marketing automation platform, so I've got to do some work on the integration. That's what will stretch this time frame out. Obviously, implementing multiple scores would also stretch this time frame out. But if you've got the data you need, if you're doing one score, probably get it done in a few weeks, and then down at the bottom, the last 2 rows, I just, as a reminder, put in at the end of the 3rd month, we run an optimization workshop, as well as at the end of the 6th month to go back and review that attribution data and make sure that we've got the right scores and the right thresholds. Really is really what we're going to be talking about in our scoring model. So that's a general timeline that a lot of people would use for getting a lead scoring model implemented. And that's actually it. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. If there are any other questions, happy to take them now.
Yes,
But I do know
there is one more auto which has just popped up. It's
Okay.
from Isabel. Is there a situation where you would not recommend combining both profile and engagement for scoring, but maybe only one or the other? For instance, in a smaller organization or one with a small pool of leads because they are at the beginning of their marketing lead gen efforts, or do you think two should always be combined?
Well, I think they should always be combined, but that's not to say that you would not send over someone who might be like a D on the profile side of things. If you're very early and you know that all of the leads you're getting are already kind of vetted in terms of, you're getting lists that have already have the profile that meets your criteria, maybe it's not going to be so important. I certainly would suggest, even if you're at early stages like that, and even if the leads you are getting are very well, curated, if you will, it's not a bad idea to at least score them, even if they all come up as A's. But at least you've got that idea in your head, so that when you get to the point where you're doing more organic lead growth, you at least have the concept down of, is this the right person to be talking to? Some businesses are lucky enough where that's either everyone or they're the type of business where if someone found your business, it'd be pretty unlikely that they were somebody who was unqualified from a profile perspective. So certainly I see those where, again, the profile scoring becomes a lot easier to figure out than the engagement scoring. And I would do them both. I wouldn't combine it, at least. If you want to omit one, I would say that's fine, but I wouldn't ever combine engagement with profile, because again, you will come up on the scenario where someone is just engaging a lot, but they might not be the right person. And either way, if they're engaging a lot and all you care about is engagement, then great, they've got a high engagement score and you're all good. And again, I would omit profiling, but as I said before, I would not combine them. Combining them generally leads to trouble. All right, are there any other questions out there?
No, I think that is it.
Okay, well, thanks again, everybody, for attending. I believe we've got this session recorded, so if you wanted to go back and watch it again or share it with others, a link will be sent out within a couple of days. And my email address is up here if you do want to get in touch with me directly. And again, thanks, everybody. I hope you got some good, valuable information out of the session.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.